There's a relentless pace about life that no matter what you do, you just cannot slow it down. You can't put life on hold and ask it to pause so that you can catch your breath. Because even in those moments when you're catching your breath, life is still moving on. It's still going on in the background. And this is something that I often think about because we get so caught up in the trials of life, most of which those trials are self imposed because we lose sight of what it is that we have expectations about and the legitimacy, the justification behind those expectations. That's not what's important because that's the distraction. What I mean is that when we lose ourselves to fixating on how it is that we have rights and we have expectations and we are entitled and all of that, whether or not that's right or wrong doesn't change the context within which we need to actually navigate that, deal with it, and how we need to interact with other people, the people that we need it from, or that we expect it from, or that we deserve it from. Because that opens up so many rabbit holes, right? About the deserving thing and about the entitlement and about the expectations. That we end up then spiraling into that space about, yeah, but I'm supposed to, and you're supposed to, and they supposed to. And all of that has its place. But we can't afford to lose ourselves to that. Because when we lose ourselves to that, we also lose ourselves to being caught up in a cycle of trying to make others accountable, trying to make others mature and responsible, and all of those things. And in the process, we end up losing it within ourselves because living purposefully, living with conviction, requires that we have a sense of clarity about what we stand for, who we are. And if we become defined by who we are relative to how others perceive us, without realizing that we actually do that, that's when we lose ourselves and we blame others for not supporting us and not creating space for us. Everyone needs space to be created for them, but no one is dependent on that to take place before we can function in our own way. And I say this because life has taught us very valuable lessons. And I say taught us, not just me, because I think everyone learns these lessons. It's just with the amount of shame we attach to recognizing or acknowledging that we learn tough lessons because of our own behavior and our own decisions and choices. The amount of shame that goes along with getting that wrong prevents us from being able to have healthy conversations about it. When I set out to do this podcast, I had just an idea in my mind about what it is that I wanted to talk about in the podcasts. And for whatever reason, I decided let's call it tough discussions because tough discussions seems to be the thing that we struggle with the most as a society, as a community. And this is more global phenomenon rather than something that's limited to the Indo-Pak community from which I hail, so to speak. I don't enjoy much presence in that community, so I can't say that it's my community, but that's what I'm familiar with, right? That's what the last 54 years of my life have been about, is experiencing life in that community. So that's my frame of reference, so to speak. But it can't be my only frame of reference. Because if it is my only frame of reference, then in my 50s, I would have wasted a lot of life by looking at the world through a single lens only. And that's where things get quite colorful, is that when you engage with people who only have one lens through which they see life, and you have multiple lenses that you can use as a point of reference purely because of the kind of experiences that life threw at you. It's not because you're this introvert traveler that has got a global view and all of that nonsense. No, it's not about any of that self-indulgent nonsense. It's about the fact that if you don't realize that your frame of reference is differently informed compared to the person you're speaking to or engaging with or need something from, how you go about talking to them is then going to be reliant on you being able to relate to where they're coming from rather than where you need them to see where you're coming from, right? So when it came to the tough discussions thing, my naivety suggested that, well, everyone appreciates a tough discussion, but they just need a different space in which to be able to have it. I don't think that's true for the most part. I think most people avoid tough discussions because, not just because it's a tough discussion, but because of the implications of having those discussions. It's like we avoid discussions where we might be unpopular, where we don't want to hurt someone else's feelings, or we don't want to deal with something that might be seen as sensitive or political or whatever it is. And it all comes down to how it is that we want to be perceived rather than whether or not that is a tough discussion. Because the discussion in itself, if you take emotions out of it, if you take sentiment out of it, if you take perception out of it, then there's no discussion that's actually tough. Because then it's a matter of wanting to arrive at a more informed perspective of what it is that you're discussing. Imagine how much simpler life would be if you approached life that way, if you approached relationships that way, if it wasn't contaminated by how do you feel or how do you think others think of you, or what does it imply when they do certain things and when they don't do certain things for you. And then we lose ourselves to that, right? So rather than tough discussions, I think it's more about fresh perspective. I often say own your life, and in the past, my original claim to fame, notoriety rather than fame, was my first publication, which was Own Your Shit. Excuse the French. But the point is that when you speak in terms that reflects how other people feel about life or about the situation they're in, they rally around you. They feel this affinity towards what it is that you're sharing is a truth that they can resonate with, they connect with it. And here's someone speaking our truth for us. But the moment you try to make it more nuanced, more neutral, so that people can take from it what they need to take from it relative to their specific circumstances, then you don't connect as much because most people don't take that accountability. Most people don't accept accountability for what they take from situations. They blame the situation for making them feel that way, for giving them reason to operate in that way, to compromise in that way. And that's where you get the victim mindset setting in. And that victim mindset is probably the worst contamination of the human spirit ever, right? Because it keeps you locked in that space of what you think others think of you, what you think others thought of you at that point in time when you adopted that mindset. And it's this kind of reflection and this kind of introspection that I think I've lost in the last year, maybe longer. Because when we try so hard to push the envelope, to break new ground and things like that, it becomes very difficult to find a balanced way to do that if we're doing it in a vacuum, in a void, where we don't have sufficient healthy engagement around us to be able to have a conversation about it without people just getting defensive and getting, I don't know, funny about things, People tend to do that when, especially, and yeah, I can say definitely within the Indo-Pak community, right? Because we are famous for our ability to avoid having tough discussions, because our idea of having a tough discussion is forcing compliance, forcing people to see things your way because you have some or other kind of background that says that you must be listened to, or you must be understood, or you must be accepted. It's the same forced compliance that destroys critical thinking. And in the absence of critical thinking, it's impossible to have any meaningful discussion, let alone a tough discussion. Because if your discussions are limited to how it is that things are supposed to be, you don't really have a lot to contribute. Because how things are supposed to be, anyone can pick up a book, can pick up a religious text of some sort, and they can derive from that how things are supposed to be. So if the only thing you can contribute towards a discussion is how things are supposed to be, or how things are not supposed to be, for example, are you contributing anything of value? Do you have an original thought that you can introduce into that conversation that creates understanding within the context of contemporary life? like the here and the now. Not trying to do something now that worked a century ago because tradition demands that that's the way we do it. Tradition has always been something that's been a bugbear of mine. As much as I love tradition, I believe it's very important. I believe that we've ritualized that as well, and this is probably at the core of the unease that I feel these days, is that there's too little conviction and purpose and substance in life, and too much of ritual, too much of decorum and protocol, and the supposed to be's, and the deservings, and the meant to be's. There's no substance in that. When you think about things that are meant to be, or you resign your life's experience to it was meant to be that way, you don't give yourself an opportunity to learn from it. More than that, you convince yourself that there was nothing to learn from it because it wasn't your fault. It was meant to be that way. The same thing applies when you look at things through that lens of fate and destiny and kismet and taqdeer and all of that, is that you abdicate accountability. You not just abdicate accountability, you actually give up the reason to want to reflect. There's nothing to reflect on if it was meant to be that way, right? And that's why introspection and tough discussions and fresh perspectives just become that much more difficult to engage on, because no one thinks there's anything to reflect on. They all think, well, life happens and we all have our own demons and we all have our own insecurities and that, and we must just be nice to each other. What does being nice to each other look like? Is it being nice to each other when we live in the shallow end of life? What happens then if, through some other consequence, someone discovers that there was a lot more depth to life? Do you think they look back fondly on those people that kept them in the shallow end of life? I don't think so. And that's what I think happens when we raise our children in protected environments. And these protected environments is not as obvious as it seems, right? Because the protected environments include exposing them to harmful content and harmful influences. That's still a protected environment, because when you expose them to that and you make it the norm, they're protected from accountability for those choices. They're protected from the accountability of what it is that they're doing that might be self-harming in that way. So, for example, one of the stupid trends of the current age is vaping, right? And I say it's a stupid trend because if people didn't learn from the very recent history of cigarettes and tobacco consumption and things like that, then you have to wonder what drives people to want to make excuses for something that is very quickly being proven to be even more detrimental than traditional cigarettes. So, when we talk about cigarettes, we're talking about like just a couple of decades ago. So in recent memory, some people are like myself are still alive long enough to have experienced it, being touted as something that's fashionable and all of that. We had Formula One races and things that were just emblazoned across the board with cigarette company logos and branding and things like that. And a little while before my time, so at least I'm not that old, before my time, there was a lot of doctors, medical professionals, healthcare practitioners that were actively encouraging, promoting, and prescribing cigarette smoking as having health benefits. And just because someone put some menthol in it, they said it was good for your asthma. That's how stupid we are, right? Now we go from that to now encouraging teens and even tweens to pick up a vape and to suck on it and blow smoke as if they've got the world on their shoulders because, life is so tough. That's teaching people coping mechanisms, and that's teaching people about what is socially acceptable is what you live your life by. Because if it's socially acceptable to be vaping when you're a teenager, when you're a tween, then what's wrong with it? Why are you being a stick in the mud? haven't used that phrase in a long time. My age is definitely showing now. What prevents you from looking at everything that goes against those social norms and appearing as if you're just spoiling the fun? You're just being too serious. Yeah, they're just having something that everyone else is doing. It's like they're living in a different time, so we mustn't expect them to behave like us and all that. We've become quite daft as a race, haven't we? It's the same daftness that has resulted in a genocide being live streamed while we all talk about it and we're all enraged about it, but no one lifts a finger about it. And that's what the problem is when we invest so much in how we feel about things and how we're such victims, which is a direct result. And please challenge me as always. This victim mindset that we have is a direct result of the stupidity of mainstream psychology. Right? It's a direct result of the stupidity of contemporary beliefs and wisdom that suggest that we suddenly understand human behavior better than any of the millennia of humans that came before us. There's an arrogance about it, but there's an opportunistic arrogance about it, right? Because again, social norms, socially acceptable norms, is what determines wisdom these days rather than substance, rather than things that actually solve problems and answer questions. We look for ways in which we can actually blame something that is out of our control for why it is that we can't be better than this. So when we approach life that way, we make it impossible to actually move out of the shallow end of life. In fact, I would go as far as saying that we actually exit the pool of life and we're just dipping our toes into it and hoping that at some point we'll have reason to want to go into the water. That's how shallow we've become about life. And it's so easy to get distracted in that. And I think that's the whole thing about the current global trends. That opportunists who have the resources can then exploit, which is distract and conquer. You distract someone by their fears, so you feed their fears, and then you conquer them by giving them solutions to the fears that you created within them. And that's how a lot of people operate in their relationships as well, is that they'll harp on what it is that sucks about their partner so that their partner will eventually feel as if no one else will accept them, so they must just settle for what they have. Until it gets too much, and usually these days it seems to get too much within 6 months or a year or even 2 years. Sometimes even shorter than that. And that's why marriages and relationships fall apart so easily these days, because people are fickle. That's why relationships are fragile. So what's the point of all of this? The point of all of this is that if we don't take stock and realize that we're given to pervasive ignorance rather than collective wisdom, we will blame life, we'll blame society, we'll blame biology, we'll blame genetics and generational trauma and childhood trauma and all sorts of things that are now defined as traumatic, even though it's just how life works. We'll blame all of that for why it is that you mustn't expect more from me. Don't expect me to be different. Don't expect me to own my life or to do things in a way that's going to be meritorious, because, when I was in school, I got a participation trophy. We've lost the value of excellence. And I often wonder, is there excellence in anything that people do these days? Or is there only excellence when the excellence implies profit? It implies dominance. Because you see, excellence is a standard we hold ourselves to. It's not what is required of us. If we only do it because it's required of us, then we're doing it because we expect something in return. So that's not a reflection of who we are. The fact that we're doing it for something in return is a reflection of who we are. So our excellence in character, our excellence in professional conduct, and in how it is that we go about applying our trade and things like that, all of that is not necessarily a reflection of our character if the reason for doing it, the motive for doing it, is because of how we want to be perceived or what is it that we're trying to secure as a reward for it. And isn't that the tragedy of the 21st century? is that people have lost their dignity and their self-respect, so much so that when you talk about self-respect, it feels like an attack. It feels like a judgment. Is that we don't even relate to each other anymore from a position of respect. We only relate based on entitlement, based on feelings and emotions and all of that. Mainstream mental health has destroyed humanity. Because if we want to believe that mainstream mental health is on point, is well informed, has got wisdom behind it, then I ask you simply this: why is it that mainstream mental health has created Israel? Why is it that mainstream mental health is what makes it okay for someone to claim entitlement without accountability? And I'm saying mainstream mental health has created Israel because mainstream mental health by default, and again, please prove me wrong on this, by default it creates a victim and then embellishes the victim with coping mechanisms, defense mechanisms, and excuses, so that they don't have to feel accountable for how it is that they're choosing to live their life, because you had a traumatic childhood, your parents were narcissists, and your partner is abusive and toxic, and those social circles are not healthy for you because they don't accept your individuality. They're trying to force you to actually live up to a certain standard and all of that. So when you have a victim mindset, you end up believing that your value system that you just adopted because it serves you, not because there's value in it. The value that you get from your value system is what's in it for you. When you have that kind of a mindset, that kind of mentality, then sniping babies becomes a legitimate pastime because, your value system says it's okay. Your rabbis or your scholars or your priests say it's okay. This is not anti-Semitic. That term, it was coined to control people from thinking against the norms. It's got no value anymore. But this is not about politics. It's not about race, religion, or anything of that sort. It's about the human having been lost in all of this. Every person who thinks that genocide is okay, every person who thinks that boycotting doesn't matter, every person who thinks that taking a stance on politically loaded issues is problematic or is just like not cool or whatever it is, those people have lost sight of their own humanity. But because they don't even know that, they'll argue fervently about why it is that you're wrong and they're not. That's what mainstream mental health does to you. It convinces you that you're entitled, convinces you that it's not your fault, that it's always someone else to blame, always something else to blame. Look at the system. The system is engineered to put you down and enslave you. When are we going to realize that we've been around as a human race, as a species, for so long that there's not a single thing we're experiencing today that hasn't already been experienced by generations and generations before us? But we're so arrogant to believe that we're the epitome of human evolution, another bullshit idea, that it leaves us with a sense of entitlement about our accuracy of understanding. That clearly, if we look at the evidence of humanity today, we don't have a lot of credibility in our evidence that suggests that we actually know what we're talking about when it comes to being human. And that's because we've lost our sense of self. We've lost our self-esteem, our self-respect, our dignity, and we've replaced it with social validation that is cloaked, that is dressed up as, I don't know, what is it dressed up as? It's a lie. That's what it is. It's a lie of what life is about, and that's why you'll never ever feel fulfilled. And as long as you don't feel fulfilled, you'll need something to fill those gaps in your life with something else, And that something else then becomes the distractions that they sell to you. Because as long as you're distracted, you'll never take a meaningful stand against anything. So then if I have the resources and I want to exploit people and exploit situations, I'll be able to do it without much challenge, because people will worship the fact that I have resources, that I have wealth. They won't worry about how I acquired it. That's why you've got the Bezos and the Gates of this world who are still celebrated and respected and are used as trophies to indicate some superiority if you're associated with them or you get them to be on your show or something. Because, like, look, I got Zuckerberg to talk to me. I got Musk to respond to me. We've got the vilest of humans occupying the most revered spaces in society. And it's not just in the wealth space, in the capitalism space. It's across the board. And I mean, the whole Israel-Palestine thing, that's got nothing to do with racism. It's got nothing to do with the fact that they're Palestinian. It's got everything to do with the fact that they want something that someone else has. And the reasons for wanting it is, it's not what they claim. It doesn't add up. And maybe that's a topic for the next episode I should try to unpack, is that everything that plays out in the mainstream and the motives behind the different parties and who's pulling the strings, it just does not add up. It doesn't stand up to the logic of scrutiny or the scrutiny of logic. It doesn't. But we're so reactive to life these days and reactive to current affairs and things like that, that we don't look beyond the distractions. So I think what they've done is they've successfully taken the divide and conquer rule and they've turned it into distract and conquer. And now if we share the same distractions, that's how they divide us. They divide us between who we want to be distracted by or what we want to be distracted by. And because your identity is not fully formed, you become defined by those things that you're associated with. Which is why people feel so strongly about their social distractions being attacked. It's ridiculous, I tell you. Anyway, that's my rabbit hole for today. I'm Zaid Ismail, and I'm hoping that in the coming episodes we're going to change tact and redirect where it is that we go with this podcast. Since I'm doing it by myself, I can make up the rules as I go along, and where that leads me, well, time will tell. I hope you join me on the journey and you share your thoughts on it as well as we go along. Take care.